Hello and welcome back to the Research Platform, a space where we discuss knowledge generation from an African perspective, where we discuss ways of producing knowledge by Africans for Africans within the African continent. This is a space where we encourage growth for Africans, growth and peer connections from African to African in order to produce knowledge from a global South. My name is Professor Angelo Dube and I welcome you back to yet another episode in this platform. So what are we dealing with today? Today we are looking at that part of a research proposal called the objectives. The objectives, you remember from past episodes that we listed the topic, the research question, the objectives and the chapter breakdown. So the objective remains interlinked with your research questions and your topic, as well as your chapter breakdown. Now, why am I discussing this? I am discussing this because I've noticed that people have supervised in the past either struggle to comprehend what this component called the research objectives actually is, or how to formulate one. So there's a little bit of a struggle, whether it's people that are doing their masters or people that are doing their doctorate, they often struggle with crafting proper research objectives. So what are these objectives? Number one, your research objectives will have a title or a heading or a topic. So in other words, there will be a portion of your study with its own subtitle, with its own heading, and that heading will be objectives. You must clearly identify it in bold lettering, and in it must also be numbered as well, and it must be called objectives because that's what it is. You need to clearly identify it. Whoever is reading your work needs to see that this is where the author is dealing with objectives. You don't just throw them in there and wait for whoever is reading your paper to sort of figure out where the objectives are. No, you number them and you present them with a heading called objectives in bold lettering. Now, what objectives will do, they will assist the reader understand where you are heading with your study. What direction are you taking with your study? So this is basically a clear indication of what you aim to achieve from your research. That's what the objectives help you to communicate through to those who are reading the work that you have produced. In other words, they will read the work that you've produced. As soon as they go to the objectives, they know what it is that you seek to achieve with this particular study. Why are you carrying out this particular study? In essence, a research question basically it's a way to figure something out through research. So the other way to look at research objectives is to say a research objective is a system or a way to figure something out through conducting research. So it is a way to understand something. It is a way to identify something. It is a way to measure something. It is a way to reveal or to explain some kind of correlation or causal relationship between one element and another element. So when you present your research objectives, you are aiming to demonstrate that. You are aiming to measure a particular thing. You are aiming to identify a particular thing. You are aiming to identify a causal relationship between one factor and a particular outcome. So in other words, what is the exact problem that you're trying to solve? You basically, with your 4 to 5 research objectives, you're basically unpacking what exactly is this problem that you're trying to understand or to resolve. Now, I have received submissions where the objectives are presented in a space of 3 pages, and you try and read through and you see there's maybe 6 to 10 paragraphs that supposedly contain objectives. That cannot be. You really cannot do that. That's not objective. I don't know what it is. It's some narrative of sorts. But it's definitely not objectives. Now, when students present such and they call it objectives, it indicates that they have failed to understand the fundamentals of what objectives are. You cannot present objectives over a space of 3 pages. That's unacceptable. That's nonsensical. You cannot present objectives in that lumped manner, broken down into 6 to 10 paragraphs. That's not objectives. Those are not objectives. What objectives would look like? There'll probably be 4. I mean, if you're writing in the context of the humanities, if you're writing in the context of social sciences, in the context of law, your objective is probably between 4 and 5, and they will be numbered in a very clear way. In other words, these will be one-liners. Number A, number B, number C, number D. That's it, you're done. In a space of a quarter of a page, you've presented your objectives. Your reader understands, having read your research questions, your reader will now focus on your objectives, which are clearly tabulated, numbered from 1 to 5 or 1 to 4, depending on how many objectives you have. But the tendency to then present objectives over 3 pages, made up of several paragraphs, takes away from your study. It actually buries your objectives, because the reader cannot find what your objectives are when they read that. So your objectives should be clearly tabulated, 4 to 5 objectives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, numbered sequentially like that, in just a short, space, maybe a quarter of a page. That's all it should take, really, to present objectives. Not these 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages that we receive and people call those objectives. Let me make an example of one of my supervisees that successfully finished his master's thesis. He was basically trying to research a particular phenomenon within the Zambian legal system. And I'll begin by presenting his research questions and then go to how he then presented his objectives, so that you can see a correlation between the objectives and the research questions. He posed 2 questions. He says, what are Zambia's international human rights obligations vis-a-vis the rights to freedom of assembly, association, and expression? In other words, he is studying, 3 rights: freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and freedom of expression. And he's asking the question, what obligations does Zambia have in international law in relation to these 3? Now, he's probably selected these 3 and they form part of his research question because chances are that they are problematic within the Zambian human rights sphere. So his second question is that, has Zambia effectively implemented her international human rights obligations in respect of these particular freedoms? So once he identifies that Zambia has obligations in respect of these 3 freedoms, his next question is, has Zambia done its part in meeting its obligations? Has Zambia respected these rights? Has Zambia promoted these rights? Has Zambia fulfilled these rights? Has Zambia protected these rights? Those are his 2 research questions. Clear, succinct. They're answerable, they're measurable. He then goes on to tackle his objectives, and there are 4 of them. His first objective is to analyze the place of international law within the Zambian municipal legal system. It's not a paragraph, it's not a whole page, it's just 1 line: to analyze the place of international law within the Zambian municipal legal system. He moves on to the second objective: to explore Zambia's human rights obligations, both at the international level and at the regional level. He moves on to the third objective, and he writes to investigate the human rights situation in Zambia by identifying cases of human rights violations by both private actors and state actors. He does then present his final objective: to make recommendations to enhance Zambia's enforcement of her international human rights obligations. Pretty straightforward, in 4 simple straight lines numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. He presents his objectives, and if you look at the objectives, they are linked, or they are connected to his initial 2 research questions. There is a common thread, a golden thread flowing through his research questions and his obligations, and his objectives. So the reader is not left thinking, what are the objectives here? What is this person aiming to achieve? What is this person aiming to study? What is he trying to understand? Because remember, we said one of the functions of an objective, or of objectives, is to reveal or explain some kind of correlation or some kind of causal connection or causal relationship between one factor and another phenomenon. And in this particular example I've just given, he aims to analyze, he aims to identify particular cases of violations in Zambia and determine if those have caused Zambia to actually fall foul of her international human rights obligations. It's that straightforward. It's that simple. But you cannot be assisted if you're going to be submitting a proposal containing 4 pages worth of objectives. Those are not objectives. I don't know what it is. It's confusion. So I hope this episode assisted you a lot there in terms of identifying proper objectives for your study, in terms of understanding what objectives are, and in terms of understanding what objectives should look like. Remember that we said in past episodes, and you can watch these videos here, that your objectives must naturally flow out into your chapters, your various chapters. Already from the examples that I've given, you can see that each one of those objectives is a chapter on its own. So this person, by simply designing proper objectives, has clearly assisted himself in designing a sound chapter breakdown. I hope that was a helpful episode, short as it was, but I hope it contained that, impact that is required for you to sort of pursue your studies and push on with your research. And remember to leave comments below and suggest topics for us. Critique us where you need to critique us, because we believe that critical appraisal is fundamental to the growth of any platform, including the research platform. We're Africans. We're trying to produce knowledge for Africans by Africans. We're tired of reading our stories being written about us when we are not part of the narrative. We are only in the narrative, but we're not influencing the narrative. This is a platform to influence the narrative, a platform to say things about ourselves, to tell our own story, because only through doing that can Africa rise again. And indeed, as we say, Maibuyi Africa, indeed izobuya, Africa will rise again. Until next time, Professor Angelo Jibe signing out and saying cheers.